He never wanted the world to know just how deeply he resented George Harrison. But the truth has a way of slipping through the cracks. And now, decades later, the full story is finally coming to light. It wasn't a loud feud, not one of those explosive celebrity rivalries splashed across headlines. No, this was a slow burn, a quiet hatred, the kind that grows behind polite smiles and forced handshakes. And the reason behind it all is far more shocking than anyone ever imagined. From the outside, their relationship looked normal, professional, even friendly at times. But those close to the situation knew better. They saw the tension. They heard the whispers. They noticed how he avoided Harrison, how his expression tightened whenever the name George came up. And while fans believed Harrison to be the gentle, spiritual Beatle, the real story behind their private friction reveals a darker, far more complicated truth. It all began with a single moment, one that seemed harmless at the time, but in hindsight, it was the spark that ignited years of resentment. A moment when Harrison's quiet charm and legendary creativity overshadowed someone who desperately needed recognition of his own. That feeling of being eclipsed never faded. It only deepened. Some said he felt betrayed. Others claimed it was jealousy. But the truth was even more personal and far more painful. Imagine being in a room where everyone looks at one man like he's a genius, a saint, a musical prophet, while you stand there feeling invisible. That's how it started. One compliment Harrison received too many. One project he dominated. One decision he influenced that left others feeling powerless. The imbalance grew until it consumed everything. And because Harrison rarely confronted conflict head-on, the tension remained buried, festering in silence. He wasn't the type to argue in public. His quiet demeanor made the resentment even worse. Instead of shouting matches, there were long stares. Instead of fights, there was distance. Instead of reconciliation, there was a widening gap no one dared to bridge. Friends who witnessed their interactions described it as uncomfortable, icy, and at times openly hostile without words. Yet the world never saw it. To the public, Harrison was untouchable, a beloved icon, a spiritual legend. Admitting hatred toward someone so adored wasn't just risky, it was career suicide. So he kept it hidden, buried, locked away. But behind the scenes, the bitterness never stopped growing. Every success Harrison enjoyed added fuel to the fire. Every award, every headline, every praise-filled interview felt like a reminder of what he would never be. It wasn't just personal, it was existential. Harrison represented everything he wanted but couldn't have. The question that haunted him was simple. Why Harrison? Why always Harrison? Why did the world worship him while ignoring the quiet suffering of others around him? That question and its brutal answer would define the rest of their story. It happened during a project that was supposed to bring everyone together. A collaboration filled with excitement, nostalgia, and the promise of reliving the magic of the past. But instead of unity, it became the breaking point. The moment he realized that whatever he felt toward George Harrison wasn't just irritation or rivalry. It was something deeper, something that had been building for years and finally burst into the open. It started with a disagreement so small that no one paid attention at first. A simple creative choice. A suggestion Harrison made with his usual calm confidence, the kind that made people nod along without question. But this time, Harrison's influence pushed someone else's ideas aside. Someone who was already tired of being overshadowed, tired of being the one whose contributions were quieted or dismissed. For Harrison, it was just another day of offering input. For the other man, it was the final straw. Crew members who were there recall the shift instantly. The air changed. The room went quiet. He stared at Harrison like he had finally seen the truth behind all those years of polite, spiritual charm. And for the first time, the hatred wasn't hidden. It slipped out through clenched teeth, a tightened jaw, and words he could never take back. What made this moment so devastating was that Harrison didn't react with anger. He didn't fight back. He simply stepped away, as if conflict was beneath him. That calmness, that spiritual composure, only made things worse. Because in that silence, he felt dismissed all over again. Unheard, unimportant, invisible. It wasn't just the creative disagreement, though that was the spark. It was everything leading up to it. Years of feeling like Harrison always got the final say, always commanded respect, always carried that aura that made others fall in line. And deep down, he knew that if he exploded publicly, he would be the villain, not Harrison. Because nobody wanted to believe that the quiet Beatle could be part of something messy. But behind closed doors, it was messy. Their team described the tension as heavy enough to crush a room. Small interactions became battlegrounds. Side comments became weapons. He believed Harrison undermined him, while Harrison quietly believed the resentment came from insecurity. Neither man ever said these things directly, but everyone around them felt it like static in the air. The breaking point came when Harrison made a decision that affected the entire project. A decision that sidelined him once again. A decision made without discussion, delivered with that soft-spoken authority Harrison naturally carried. That was the moment he walked out. No dramatic announcement. No goodbye. Just a door closing with the weight of decades behind it. People stood stunned, unsure whether to follow him or pretend nothing happened. Harrison stayed seated, looking at the floor, understanding too late that something irreversible had happened. From that day forward, their working relationship never recovered. Something inside him snapped, and the private hatred he carried finally shaped the rest of their interactions. Even when they stood in the same room, they weren't truly together. There was a wall between them, one built from silence, envy, pain, and years of unresolved bitterness. The fallout from that single moment would go on to sabotage everything that came next. The years that followed revealed what no fan ever suspected. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a storm of hidden agendas, whispered conversations, and quiet envy that had been growing in the shadows long before anyone realized. And once those buried emotions came to the surface, there was no going back. To understand the depth of the resentment, you have to understand the world they lived in. In that world, George Harrison wasn't just a musician, he was a symbol, a spiritual icon, a creative force, someone whose very presence could shift the mood in a room. But not everyone saw that glow the same way. Not everyone felt inspired by him. Some felt threatened. Some felt replaced. Some felt like the more Harrison shined, the dimmer they became. And he, the one who hated Harrison, felt it more intensely than anyone. Privately, he believed Harrison used his soft-spoken nature strategically, like armor. While others confronted their battles openly, Harrison disarmed people with kindness and meditation and carefully chosen words. But behind closed doors, those traits felt less like virtue and more like manipulation. He believed Harrison knew exactly how much influence he had, and used it. There were whispered complaints among team members about how Harrison's opinions always seemed to override everyone else's. Meetings that felt one-sided. Projects that revolved around Harrison's comfort. Decisions swayed by his calm suggestions. And to someone already drowning in insecurity, each of these moments felt like confirmation that Harrison was slowly, quietly pushing him out. That was where the envy took root. It wasn't envy of Harrison's fame. He had fame of his own. It wasn't envy of his talent. He respected that, even if it hurt. It was envy of Harrison's control, his influence, his ability to sway people without raising his voice, his natural gravity. That was the quality he wished he had, and the lack of it made him feel powerless. And when a man feels powerless, he starts to imagine conspiracies where there may be none. He began to see Harrison's every move as calculated. Every soft smile as patronizing, every suggestion as sabotage. And once his mind reached that point, nothing could convince him otherwise. Even innocent comments felt like attacks. Even small disagreements felt like betrayal. The people around them noticed the shift. Conversations grew colder. Decisions took longer because everyone tiptoed, afraid of igniting another eruption. Some said Harrison tried to reach out privately to defuse the tension. Others claimed he didn't bother, that he quietly believed time would fix everything. But time didn't heal anything. It only deepened the cracks. The true breaking point came when he overheard a conversation he was never meant to hear. Someone praising Harrison for a creative idea, an idea he believed he had contributed first. The praise went entirely to Harrison. The recognition bypassed him completely, and that single moment broke whatever fragile patience he had left. Once the resentment boiled over, it didn't just poison their relationship. It began to bleed into his work, his public image, and eventually his entire career. What started as a silent grudge against George Harrison spiraled into a chain reaction that nearly dismantled everything he had spent years building. And the most tragic part? He never realized how much damage the hatred was causing until it was almost too late. In the months that followed their deepest rupture, the tension wasn't contained behind closed doors anymore. Industry insiders began whispering about the growing conflict, and the rumors traveled fast. Some claimed he refused to work on anything where Harrison was involved. Others said he demanded more control, more credit, more recognition. Anything to escape Harrison's shadow. To outsiders, it looked like ego. Inside, it was desperation. Producers began to hesitate. Not because he lacked talent, he had more than enough, but because nobody wanted to manage the explosive atmosphere between the two. Every project became risky. Every meeting felt like walking on a tightrope stretched between two worlds. The calm, composed aura of Harrison, and the storm gathering inside the man who hated him. Worse, his own behavior began shifting in ways he couldn't hide. He grew impatient, defensive, easily triggered by anything that even hinted of Harrison's influence. He snapped at colleagues. He rewrote entire sections of work just to avoid being compared to Harrison. He turned down opportunities simply because Harrison's name appeared anywhere near the project. People noticed. Slowly, phone calls became less frequent. Invitations stopped arriving. Newer artists who once looked up to him began to distance themselves. The industry isn't kind to those who seem unpredictable, and he was becoming exactly that. And the more isolated he became, the more he blamed Harrison for the decline. But the truth, the harsh truth, was that Harrison wasn't the one destroying his reputation. His own bitterness was. Behind the scenes, Harrison hardly spoke of the feud. He never threw insults, never retaliated. If anything, Harrison's quiet nature made the situation worse, because every time Harrison refused to fight back, it only amplified how unbalanced the conflict had become. Some friends tried to intervene. They begged him to let go of the resentment before it consumed him. They warned him that Harrison wasn't the enemy, that the real enemy was the narrative he'd built in his own mind. But he couldn't hear them. The bitterness had become part of his identity, part of his drive, a twisted fuel that kept him going but burned everything else down. The turning point came during an interview, one he wasn't prepared for. A journalist casually mentioned Harrison's recent achievements, expecting a polite reaction. Instead, he answered with a tense, clipped comment that hinted at conflict. Just a few words, but that was all it took. Fans caught it instantly. Social media magnified it. Headlines speculated about the feud. And overnight, he became the villain in a story he never meant to expose. Harrison's fans were relentless. They painted him as jealous, bitter, petty. And the industry, they didn't want to deal with the fallout. Doors closed faster than ever. Projects collapsed. A career that once felt unstoppable now seemed to crumble in real time. For the first time, he realized that hating Harrison wasn't just hurting him emotionally. It was destroying him publicly. And ironically, even then, Harrison never said a word. Not a comment. Not a rebuttal. Not even a hint of defending himself. His silence, his signature calm, spoke louder than anything else. And that silence forced the world to choose sides. Most chose Harrison. But this story wasn't finished. Not yet. Because what emerged years later changed everything we thought we knew about the feud, the hatred, and the real reason behind the decades of bitterness. For years, the world believed the feud was simple jealousy, competition, ego. But when the truth finally surfaced, it shattered everything we thought we knew. Because his hatred for George Harrison wasn't rooted in fame or credit or even creative control. It was rooted in something far more personal. Something he carried long before they ever shared a studio or a stage. It began with a confession. Quiet, unexpected, and spoken years after Harrison had passed. He didn't reveal it in an interview or a documentary. It slipped out privately, during a conversation with someone who had seen the toll the hatred took on him. And in that moment of rare vulnerability, he admitted something that reframed the entire story. He never hated George Harrison because of what Harrison did. He hated him because of what Harrison represented. To him, Harrison symbolized everything he had lost in life: peace, purpose, direction, and control. While he spent years battling insecurity, doubt, and inner chaos, Harrison seemed to carry this unshakable calm, this spiritual stillness that made people feel safe around him. And that contrast became unbearable. The more Harrison embraced his identity, the more he felt disconnected from his own. It wasn't Harrison overshadowing him. It was his own fear that he would never measure up. All the moments he interpreted as manipulation, all the soft-spoken decisions he took as power plays, all the praises he thought were stolen from him, they were filtered through the lens of someone who felt broken in ways the world never saw. And then came the part that shocked even those closest to him. He revealed that years earlier, long before their tension began, Harrison unknowingly wounded him with a single sentence. A simple remark. A moment so small that Harrison likely never remembered it. But he did. And he replayed it over and over for decades. It happened during a casual conversation, one of those moments between artists where creativity flows and ideas bounce around freely. Harrison, in his usual gentle honesty, offered a critique that was meant to help, not hurt. A suggestion that his work felt unfocused, as if he was searching for something he hadn't found yet. Harrison said it kindly, but those words struck a nerve so deep, he never recovered from it. Because he was searching for identity, searching for validation, searching for peace. And hearing someone like Harrison point out the very insecurity he'd been hiding his entire life felt like a knife to the heart. That was the moment the resentment began. Not because Harrison insulted him, but because Harrison unintentionally exposed a truth he couldn't face. The years that followed were shaped by that wound. Every interaction felt like salt rubbed into it. Every success Harrison enjoyed felt like a reminder of the calm and clarity he couldn't achieve himself. The hatred he carried wasn't toward Harrison the man, but toward the mirror Harrison unknowingly held up to him. And here's the most heartbreaking part. He admitted, quietly, that he didn't truly hate George Harrison. He hated how small he felt next to him. After Harrison's death, he carried the guilt. He watched tribute after tribute as the world mourned the gentle Beatle, the spiritual seeker, the artist who influenced millions. And for the first time in his life, he wished he could take it all back. The resentment, the bitterness, the years wasted in anger. He said the words no one ever expected to hear. I misunderstood him. I didn't see who he really was. Because I didn't understand who I was. By the time the truth came out, it was too late to apologize. Too late to repair anything. Too late to stand beside Harrison one last time and offer peace. But maybe that's why this revelation hit so hard. Because it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about rivalry. It was about two men, one battling inner chaos, the other radiating inner calm, colliding in a world that magnified their differences. And in the end, the feud wasn't a story of hatred. It was a story of insecurity, misunderstanding, and the silent battles we never see in public. A story where the villain was never George Harrison, but the pain someone carried long before he ever met him. In the end, the feud that once looked like a clash between two giants was really the story of a man fighting a war inside himself. George Harrison never set out to destroy anyone's confidence, never tried to overshadow or manipulate. He simply lived his truth, calm, focused, spiritually grounded. And that quiet strength became a painful mirror for someone who felt lost in ways the world never understood. His resentment wasn't born from cruelty. It grew from wounds he carried long before Harrison ever entered the picture. Insecurity, self-doubt, the fear of never being enough. And when those fears collided with Harrison's effortless presence, they twisted into decades of bitterness that shaped his career, his relationships, and his legacy. But the revelation that came later, after the dust settled, after Harrison was gone, changed everything. He realized the hatred wasn't about Harrison at all. It was a reflection of the emptiness he felt inside. A misunderstanding that cost him years of peace, poisoned opportunities, and a friendship he never knew he needed. The heartbreaking truth is this: he didn't hate George Harrison. He hated the version of himself he saw standing next to him. And by the time he understood that, the chance to mend their bond had already slipped away. A rivalry born in silence ended in silence. But the lesson it leaves behind speaks louder than any argument ever could. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought between people, but within the human heart itself.